The rain had been tapping against the office window for so long that it felt like part of the building itself. Midnight overhead lights hummed, computers glowed in abandoned cubicles, and the towering financial empire of Haverson Tech stood on the brink of collapse without the world knowing. The servers were shorted, the product rollout had failed in front of partners, and $100 million worth of reputation and investor confidence was evaporating by the hour. Down in the lobby, a single dad named Daniel sat with a cheap backpack and a lunchbox with cartoon stickers. He was not dressed like the elite engineers upstairs. He wasn't supposed to be part of tonight's meeting. He was only here because earlier that day he had been fired. They said the company needed fresh minds. They said downsizing. They said his department wasn't essential anymore. They didn't say his daughter Lily would cry when she heard. They didn't say bills wouldn't care. They didn't say he'd still care enough about the company to stay in the lobby long after he signed the exit papers, because a part of him refused to let 7 years of dedication end like a deleted file. So he sat and waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for exactly. Maybe dignity, maybe closure, maybe an opportunity that didn't exist. Upstairs, panic reigned. The CEO, Victoria Hale, stood with perfectly controlled posture yet trembling hands. She was brilliant, feared, respected, and tonight, completely helpless. Dozens of experts surrounded her, the biggest names in cybersecurity, system architects, consultants charging fees larger than Daniel's yearly salary. A board waiting on answers. Markets opening soon. We need a fix. She said quietly, staring at the frozen dashboard flashing red alerts. Not a theory, not a maybe, a fix before morning. Nobody spoke. Because nobody had one. The catastrophic bug had corrupted critical systems tied to confidential data streams. If released incorrectly, private contracts would leak and crash the company. If not released, investors would assume failure and crash the company anyway. Billion vanished either way. Someone swallowed loudly. Someone blamed someone else. Someone suggested shutting everything down and rebuilding phase by phase. That would take months. They had hours. Victoria's jaw tightened. She left the room. She walked through the silent hallway, heels echoing like a countdown. She stopped at the top of the marble staircase, staring down at the dim lobby. A night guard nodded respectfully. A cleaning lady pushed a cart, and on a worn leather couch sat a man with tired eyes watching the lights flicker above him. She almost didn't recognize him. Almost. Daniel. She froze. They'd let him go just 6 hours ago. His file came back to her mind, known for solving impossible issues, quiet, consistent, never asked for recognition, never caused trouble, single parent, took extra shifts, constantly praised by old managers, quietly ignored by new leadership. And suddenly she remembered something else, a note in his old performance review. Thinks differently, the kind of guy who fixes in minutes what others can't fix in weeks. Her heart skipped. She took a step down. Then another. He didn't notice her until she was standing in front of him. You're still here, she said softly. I don't really have anywhere else to be tonight. He replied with a small shrug. He looked tired but calm. The kind of calm that comes from being broken so many times that panic stops bothering. Why? She asked. He breathed slowly. Because this company mattered to me, and I didn't know how to walk out from something I built pieces of without saying goodbye. There was something raw in his honesty. No ego, no bitterness in his voice, even if it lived in his heart. Just sincerity. You heard what happened, she said. Everyone has. He nodded. Internet whispers, investor forums, people are scared. And you? She asked. Not scared, he replied, sad, angry maybe, but not scared. She studied him for a moment. You know what's happening in our servers, she said carefully. He nodded once, and, she whispered, do you think it can be solved? He didn't immediately answer. He stared past her as if running scenarios in his head. Then, "Yes," he said. Her breath caught, not because of the word, but because he said it without hesitation. "How?" she asked quietly. "Take me upstairs," he said. She hesitated. He wasn't staff anymore. He had no badge. Security protocol would scream against it. Legal would choke on it. The board would rage. Yet there she was, a billionaire CEO standing in front of a fired man, realizing he might be the only person who truly cared enough to save the company for reasons beyond profit. She nodded. Minutes later, Daniel walked into the war room. Heads snapped up, confusion, annoyance, disbelief. Who authorized? What is he doing here? He doesn't work here anymore. Victoria raised a hand. He works here tonight. Silence. They stepped aside reluctantly. Daniel didn't waste time bragging or giving speeches or promising miracles. He rolled a chair over to the main console and quietly started typing. Someone scoffed. Someone whispered, "This is desperate." Someone muttered, "We're trusting a lay. Doff engineer now." Then the room went quiet. Because Daniel's fingers were moving with terrifying certainty. He wasn't trying things. He was navigating like a man who had memorized the skeleton of the system. He bypassed layers most engineers treated like sacred walls. He rewired logic chains others hadn't even noticed existed. He traced a hidden feedback loop in the architecture that had triggered the collapse, and then he stopped typing. Everyone leaned in. He leaned back and spoke calmly. "This wasn't a bug," he said. "It was a chain reaction created when the security updates tried to block themselves. Blank stares," he sighed softly, then simplified. "You tried to make the system too perfect. It started fighting itself." Murmurs filled the room. "So what did you do?" one consultant demanded. "I reset the authority hierarchy," Daniel replied. "I created a channel so the system recognizes one command structure instead of three competing ones. Data integrity is restored. The rollout can proceed without exposing anything." "How long?" someone asked. "It's already done," he said. They stared at the screens, one by one. The red alerts faded. Orange turned to yellow. Yellow turned to calm, clean green. The crisis indicators vanished. Backups synced. Security walls stabilized. The nightmare dissolved. The room erupted. People who doubted him seconds ago gasped. Consultants blinked in disbelief. Executives spoke into phones with shaking voices. Someone whispered, "He just solved $100 million meltdown in under 15 minutes. Victoria didn't cheer. She didn't clap. She just looked at him, really looked at him, a man they had thrown away. And in those minutes, he had proven worth more than an army. But then something happened, something nobody expected. She froze, not like panic. Freeze, not like fear. Freeze, like realization. Freeze, everything in her world paused. She saw the truth. He wasn't a hero of the night. He was a reflection of their greatest mistake. They didn't fail because of a bug. They failed because they valued people incorrectly. They kept showpieces. They discarded substance. They paid millions for the loudest voices and ignored the quiet genius who never demanded attention, and he had stayed, even after they humiliated him. Even after the world he helped build told him he wasn't needed. He stayed out of loyalty, and that shattered her. The room slowly quieted as they noticed her standing there, unmoving. "Victoria," someone asked. She didn't answer. She walked toward Daniel instead. He turned slightly, uncertain. She didn't speak at first. She simply looked at the tired single dad with a backpack, slightly messy hair, worn shoes, and eyes that carried too much weight and too much patience. Finally she whispered, "I am sorry." The room stilled. CEO didn't apologize, not publicly, not like this, not to someone like him, but she meant every syllable. "We fired the wrong man," she said. "We humiliated someone we should have been thanking. We forgot what loyalty looks like. That won't happen again." He swallowed, not trusting his voice. She continued softly, "How much do we owe you for tonight?" He shook his head slowly. "I didn't do it for money, I know," she replied. "That's why you deserve more than any amount we could write." She took a breath. "You came back when most people would have walked away. You saved our company. You saved thousands of jobs. You saved our future. And I believe you saved me from making the worst leadership mistake of my career." She looked at the board members silently watching. Then back at him. "I want you back," she said steadily, "not as what you were, not as an employee we can dismiss when convenient. I want you at the core. I want you leading. I want your voice to be the one this company listens to." He blinked. "What are you saying?" he asked quietly. "I'm saying," she replied, "I want you as Chief Systems Director, highest authority on infrastructure, full department, full control, salary beyond anything you ever imagined, your daughter's future secured, and my personal trust." Gasps. Whispers. Someone protested weakly, but Victoria turned, eyes sharp with authority. "He just proved more competence in 15 minutes than half this room has in 5 years. If anyone has a problem with that, you may resign now." No one spoke. Daniel looked stunned, not because of the power, not the money, because someone finally saw him, really saw him. He took a breath. "My daughter," he said quietly. "She asked me earlier why the world keeps punishing people who work hard and stay kind. I didn't have an answer." He looked around. Then at her. "Tonight, maybe I do." He extended his hand. She didn't shake it. She stepped forward and hugged him, not as CEO and employee, but as human to human. The room applauded, not corporate applause. Respect applause. Later, as dawn light spilled across the city, Daniel stepped outside. The rain had stopped. The sky wasn't bright yet, but it wasn't dark anymore either. He called home. A sleepy little voice answered. "Daddy." He smiled, finally letting emotion break through. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered. "Everything's going to be okay now." He looked up at the towering building, no longer as someone who'd been thrown away, but as someone the world finally recognized. Behind him, at the top floor window, Victoria watched quietly, not as a frozen CEO anymore, but as a leader who had just learned what true strength looks like. And all of it happened because, on the worst night of the company's life, the man they thought disposable saved everything in minutes and reminded them what real value truly is. Morning sunlight spilled across the glass towers like a promise. Cars moved below, people hurried to work, and the world went on unaware that only hours earlier, Haverson Tech had stood inches from disaster. Inside, however, everything felt different. Daniel walked through the lobby not as someone waiting to be judged, but as someone finally invited to exist. Employees turned when they saw him. Some whispered, some smiled, some simply watched quietly, realizing he'd become a story they would tell for years. Upstairs, the boardroom doors opened and voices filled the hallway, voices filled with tension, calculation, politics. Power rarely changed hands quietly, and today it wasn't just systems that needed restructuring, it was the company's soul. Victoria stood at the head of the long mahogany table, hands clasped, eyes steady. Board members were seated, still wearing traces of last night's fear behind their polished confidence. They weren't used to vulnerability. They certainly weren't used to being saved by someone they'd labeled non-essential. "Let's begin," Victoria said firmly. The CFO cleared his throat. "Before we celebrate too much, we should discuss liability. Protocol was broken. An ex-employee accessed critical systems that could raise questions. Questions. That word alone disgusted her." "Questions," Victoria repeated quietly. "He didn't access," he rescued. "He didn't break protocol. He saved everything your protocol failed to protect." A senior board member leaned forward. "Emotion aside, we can't build a system around exceptions." Victoria's expression hardened. "We're not building around an exception. We're correcting a foundational flaw. Our culture rewarded loud arrogance and punished quiet competence. That ends today. Silence. Then she said words that made the board freeze the same way she had last night. I am restructuring leadership, effective immediately. Names were announced, departments dissolved, comfortable chairs suddenly had no owners. Some reacted with outrage, some with shock, some with humbled silence because they knew this reckoning was overdue. And him, a board member finally asked stiffly, as if saying Daniel's name would cost pride, "Where does he fit in all of this?" Victoria didn't hesitate. "He leads," she said, not from a corner, from the center. The vote was tense. Political, resistant, but she was unstoppable, and the market's morning pulse only strengthened her hand. Investors wanted confidence. Employees wanted direction. The world wanted proof the company had learned something. She was making sure it did. Meanwhile, Daniel waited in a small conference room with a cup of cheap vending machine coffee in his hands. The same machine he used for years, the same bitter taste, except today it didn't taste like tired survival. It tasted like the start of something he never dared imagine. The door opened. Victoria stepped in, no entourage, no theatrics, just her. She sat across from him. "Well," she said softly, that was louder than anything you did last night. He offered a shy smile. "Everything okay?" "Yes," she nodded, "because I refuse to let anyone rewrite what happened. People in power love to twist heroism into coincidence. I didn't let them." He chuckled faintly. "Thank you." "No," she replied. "Thank you." He studied her a moment. Something was different. Not the authority. That was still there. But the distance was gone. She looked human. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now." She exhaled. "Now you take the position I offered. And I warn you it's going to be harder than saving servers." He raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Because," she said quietly, "fixing code is logical. Fixing people isn't." He looked down for a moment. "I can try. That's why I chose you," she said, "not because you're brilliant, but because you care." He was quiet. Then he nodded slowly. "All right," he said simply. "Let's build something that deserves loyalty." By noon, word spread across the company like wildfire. He wasn't a rumor anymore. He was the new force shaping everything. Employees who had been invisible suddenly felt seen. Engineers who'd been suffocating under corporate ego began to hope. Workers whispered that maybe this place would finally prioritize people who worked instead of people who performed. Somewhere near the back offices, an older janitor approached Daniel shyly. "Sir," he said nervously, "my son works in testing. He always said you were the only one who ever stayed late and helped without making him feel small. Thank you for staying last night." Daniel smiled gently. "Tell your son this place is going to start listening now." The janitor blinked back tears and nodded. By afternoon, he finally went home. Lily was waiting at the door, shoes mismatched, hair messy, heart enormous. She flew into his arms. "Daddy, did they say sorry? Did they realize they were wrong? Did they give your job back?" Her voice carried a mix of innocence and fierce belief that good people deserve good endings. He hugged her tighter. "Yes," he whispered, "they did more than that." She leaned back, eyes wide, like in the movies. He laughed softly. "Better than the movies." He cooked dinner that night without the quiet heaviness that had lived inside him for years. They ate, they talked, they laughed, and for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a fight. It felt like a gift. Weeks passed, numbers recovered, markets restored confidence, but more importantly, people changed. Meetings became conversations, not performances. Ideas rose based on merit, not titles. Daniel didn't bark orders. He listened, he explained, he taught. He reminded everyone that brilliance didn't need ego to exist. And Victoria, she didn't forget the lesson either. Late one evening, months later, she stood alone in the same war room where chaos once lived. She looked at the calm, steady green dashboard and whispered to herself, "He saved us." and we became worth saving. Behind her, Daniel walked in, dinner in hand. "You haven't eaten," he said. She smiled softly, "Still learning from you, apparently." They stood beside each other, watching the city below, not boss and subordinate, not savior and saved, but two people who rebuilt something stronger than a company. They rebuilt integrity, they rebuilt trust, they rebuilt belief that quiet good people can still change everything. And somewhere deep inside, in that quiet unspoken place where truth lives, they both knew that $100M problem wasn't the real crisis. Losing humanity was, and thanks to a single dad who refused to walk away, they never lost it.